and welcome back to the ANCW podcast, Calling All Cattle Women. I'm your host for this episode, Leanna. With me today, I have Kate Schulz from New Mexico Beef Council, and she is a nutritionist. Welcome.
Thank you.
We're really appreciative that you're here with us today and taking time out of your busy schedule. Could you go ahead and start us off with talking about your background and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. So yes, my name is Kate Schulz, and I do work as the consulting dietitian for the New Mexico Beef Council and then also the Colorado Beef Council. So I've worked as a dietitian for about the last 20 years and really in the ag space for about the last 5 to 6 years. So I grew up on my family's farm and ranch on the Nebraska Wyoming state line. I married into a ranching family from the San Luis Valley of Colorado. I knew that there were dietitians in the ag space, in beef, in dairy, in different commodities. But it really wasn't until 2018 that I saw the job posted in Colorado for the Colorado Beef Council, wanting a consulting dietitian. And I thought, this might be a great way for me really to bring together my career as a dietitian and bridge that with my, growing up in ag. And so that's really been one of the most rewarding things at this time, is to be able to bridge that gap and to really expose people to agriculture, specifically medical professionals that I work with in the position at the New Mexico Beef Council.
So how did you end up choosing the career of a dietitian?
That's a really good question. I went to school at the University of Wyoming, and my initial major was pharmacy. In kind of the very first couple of years, I was required to take a nutrition class. And I just fell in love with it. So my aunt was a pharmacist and my mom was a nurse practitioner. So I really knew that I wanted to be in some sort of a medical field. But I do think when I took my initial just kind of foundations of nutrition, it really sparked my interest in dietetics and in nutrition. Everybody eats, hopefully at least 3 times a day. And so I think there's really an opportunity to make a large impact. There's also just so much misinformation out there that I try to dispel, a lot of myths and misperceptions. And I think that's incredibly relevant and true also in the ag space, right? And especially when it comes to diet and nutrition and exercise. So I love to be able to showcase the research that we have, not only to consumers, but also to producers and then also fellow medical professionals.
Okay. So what are some interesting things that you see when you are talking to consumers? Because that's where a big gap that we have between producers and consumers.
Yeah. And so I would have to say that probably the majority of what I do is working with fellow medical professionals who are then working with consumers. So we're trying to work with physicians, nurse practitioners, PAs, fellow dietitians, dietetic interns to dispel a lot of those myths and misperceptions, recognizing that consumers and the public are coming to them for nutrition information. And so a lot of the times it is, just in production practices and really just bringing to those professionals an understanding of why producers do what they do, the tools that they have in their toolbox. A lot of the times too, there's a lot of discussion as far as the differences from a nutritional profile between a grain finished and a grass finished animal. So really being able to, showcase that for them too. And then a lot of it does also come down to animal welfare and sustainability. So I spend a lot of time just kind of talking, through that. By no means considering myself a sustainability expert, but being able to bring to them resources that we have at the New Mexico Beef Council, resources that we have at the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, really to talk about animal welfare, sustainability, and then of course making sure that they know that American producers are providing the healthiest, safest product available for them to consume. And so a lot of that is, people hear things in the media all the time. And oftentimes it's the first thing that they hear that they tend to believe. So we have individuals who may have heard, something bad in regards to beef and beef consumption, maybe 20 years ago, 10 years ago. And the research is always changing and always evolving. And as we have, better scientific methods, better ways of doing things, we're going to have, new research. And I love to be able to showcase for them, especially the medical professionals, that, we have nearly 20 studies that show how beef can be a part of a healthy diet. And whether that is, a heart healthy diet, or a Mediterranean style, eating pattern. And so really being able to bring that information and that research to medical professionals to then be able to pass along confidently to encourage consumers to continue to consume beef is really, really important in a lot of what I do. Also working to host farm tours and getting people in front of producers so that they're not watching Netflix documentaries to get their information, or they're not listening to mainstream media, but really getting them in front of actual producers to say, hey, how do you run your operation? Why do you choose to, why do you choose to use an antibiotic, or why do you choose, maybe to use, additional hormones, and really getting the producer to share with them their story. Also, encouraging them to learn from the producer of how the producer utilizes all of the resources available to them, from a cost standpoint as well. And so really, again, I think that the majority of what I do is bridging that gap between medical professionals and ag.
What do you think is one of the most common misconceptions? Like, what's the one thing that is pretty regular with almost everyone that you talk to?
That beef is bad for heart health or health in general. And I think that we have a real opportunity to change that perception and change the way that we look at consuming beef, on a daily basis, or a couple times a week. And so I have a really great visual that I used with ANCW earlier in May, and then I have another, I guess that was April, and this is another visual that I use a lot with medical professionals, and it really highlights, when we're talking about consuming beef on a daily basis, it's not, a triple In-N-Out cheeseburger with a side of fries that are, covered in cheese, but it really is a lean, serving of beef on top of a whole grain bun with, lettuce, tomato, next to a nice side salad. So even with the medical professionals that I work with, they are always surprised at how many cuts of lean beef are available. So that is something that I really, really like to highlight, is the fact that there are, so many options available at retail that are considered lean, and really encourage them to focus on those leaner cuts of beef, focus on how you prepare it, what you pair it with, and of course the portion size as well. But that's one of the biggest things, and probably the largest impact that I am able to have in working with audiences, is really sharing with them that definition of lean beef, what to look for as far as round or loin in the cut name, and then encouraging them to look at ways, to prepare it, and how to portion it, and then pair it with fruits and vegetables.
Do you think within the general public, we kind of know that there is, but what are your thoughts on the fact that there's a lot of people who just don't understand food properly?
Yes.
Going through high school and middle school, I was forced to take all these health classes, and I didn't learn nearly as much about healthy diets and how your food affects your body as when I took an animal nutrition class. And most people don't get that. So what do you think can be done, or some steps that can be taken, from a general view to help people just understand what they're eating and how it affects them?
Yeah, I think you always want to make sure that you're looking for credible sources from the information that you're gathering. So as readily available as social media is, and all of these influencers, a lot of the times, they're not your best go-to as far as diet and nutrition information. So of course, being a registered dietitian, I always encourage people to reach out to a registered dietitian. Physicians are tasked with having to know so many things, and oftentimes nutrition is not one of the things that they're actually incredibly, because they are tasked with knowing so much. That's why they have registered dietitians available, to refer out to. So I do encourage, visiting with your physician, hopefully being able to have them refer you out to a dietitian, and then just looking, at where the information is coming from. Is it a credible source? We talk a lot in the ag industry about sustainability in regards to environmental sustainability, economic sustainability, social sustainability. In kind of the nutrition dietetics world, we talk about sustainability as far as, are you eating in a way that you are able to not only sustain human life, but then also be able to follow it for a long period of time? So oftentimes, it really gets down to the very basics. And sometimes people think that if it isn't hard, they aren't it's not going to have any impact. But I mean, it really does get back to the basics of, encouraging people to consume, food from all of the food groups, really making sure we know 9 out of 10 people already aren't getting enough fruits and vegetables. So really being able to work with them to use protein as kind of a foundation for them to get in more fruits and vegetables. Also, we cannot, not take into consideration just the importance of physical activity, the importance of good sleep, the importance of stress management. And so, it is hard because it is a multi-billion dollar industry, meaning, health and nutrition. And it's hard to siphon through all that information. It's hard for consumers to siphon through it. It's even hard for medical professionals sometimes to be like, what is the newest diet? What is the newest trend? But I really think, if it's one of those that's encouraging, you to buy a lot of supplements or things that are going to just be really, really hard to sustain for a long period of time, it's probably not the option, for you. But I do encourage, individuals to visit with their physicians, get a good baseline, as far as what their family history is, maybe what some of their concerns are, looking at lab values. And then, of course, there are dietitians all over across the country, who are willing and able to help out and make those good diet, recommendations. And that's one of the things in the audiences that I work with is, working with fellow dietitians and dietetic interns. I always tell them that I'm not here necessarily to change the way that they eat, but I do want them to be a good resource for the patients and the consumers that they see. And I want, on behalf of the New Mexico Beef Council and the, really the farmers and ranchers across the country, I want to be a good resource for them, recognizing that if they have a patient or a client or a consumer that wants to consume beef, we have resources on how they can recommend that confidently to that consumer. Again, focusing on those leaner cuts of beef, how to prepare it. And that's another big thing is that, oftentimes beef tends to be, we know this, one of the more expensive proteins. So people don't want to mess it up. So also giving them the resources available to be able to confidently cook with beef as well.
So you mentioned that like nutrition and health is like this really multi-billion dollar industry. And we see even at the government level, like their recommendations for what you should and shouldn't eat are changing every few years, right? They're always renewing that. But I believe last year or 2 years ago, Forbes published a study from Tufts University. Yeah, that's right. It was from a university from Tufts University, a study from Tufts University that talked about that, like ranked food based off of how good it was for you, and I think like some environmental factors too. And they put things like beef and eggs like a really like low score. What's your take on that? Did you hear about that? And
Yes. Yeah. And I remember, I think at the top of that, maybe it was like a donut, right? I think a donut was like,
yeah, they had Lucky
higher
Charms
ranked.
pretty high up there.
Yeah. Higher ranked. And that's, so I again, it's hard when an entity such as that is so reputable puts out information because it just causes more confusion for the consumer. And so, as you had mentioned, yes, even at the government level, we have the dietary guidelines, and the dietary guidelines do come out every 5 years. In 2020, it was a really exciting time in the beef industry because that was the first time that the dietary guidelines offered authoritative guidance from birth to 2 years of age. And with that, it really allowed the opportunity to highlight and specify the importance of iron and zinc during that time. So that really allowed for a great conversation about beef as a complementary first food. So we in the beef industry recognize the importance and really the foundation that the dietary guidelines provide. And we use that kind of as a foundation for the work that we do, but also recognizing that there are a multitude of ways and dietary patterns that lead to healthy eating and a healthy diet. The the studies such as the one from Tufts, I, kind of glanced over that. I don't feel like I can speak to it as a true expert. I do think it tends to cause some more confusion, for individuals. And I know that there was some information that came out, kind of dispelling that as well. But that's one of the challenges that we have is in being able to, when we have these entities that are incredibly reputable coming out with this information, how does that relate or resonate with consumers, and how can we kind of get back to the foundation of what is really important? As I said, we know that people aren't consuming enough fruits and vegetables. We also know the importance of protein, specifically as we age. And so I think, there's a lot of information out there as far as how much, protein people should be getting, how much should they be consuming in general. Most people are probably not consuming enough of high quality protein throughout the day as much as they should be. So that leaves a lot of room, to be able to add that in. And we know from multiple, research studies that the benefit of protein comes from, when you're consuming enough protein, you're staying fuller longer, you're maintaining lean muscle mass. It can help, aid in weight loss. And in addition, just to helping you age as healthy as possible. We know that as we age, we continue to lose muscle. So we have to work even harder to be able to keep that. And so I think, I really lean on the resources that the National Cattlemen's Beef Association has as far as the research that they're doing with respected entities, and then being able to take that information and really share it out with medical professionals and with consumers. But we have an amazing track record of, a wonderful array of studies, again, that shows the importance of lean, unprocessed red meat in a healthy eating pattern, and just the importance of that protein. And so I think there's always going to be, I like to say, there's always kind of these two camps. It seems like we've got kind of the carnivore keto camp over here, and then we have the vegan vegetarian camp over here. And oftentimes, a healthy, sustainable way of eating really is found in the middle of making sure that we're consuming all of those foods. And I always think of, we don't need to have these products, meaning, animal proteins or even plant proteins, be in competition with one another. But yet, how can they complement one another? Because we know that we get things from animal proteins that we don't from plants, and vice versa. And so really, I think, it's an unfair thing for consumers to feel like they have to essentially choose sides. We're, again, really looking at the foundation of those dietary guidelines, being able to consume adequate protein, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, dairy products, all of that. But there's just a lot of information that is out there all the time, and people are wanting to do the right thing, and people are wanting to live their best life, and they're wanting to thrive. So they're constantly looking for information. And there's no doubt that there's an array of information that they can get. And so it is really confusing and hard to kind of siphon through all of that for the consumer. So my hope is that, working as a dietitian for the New Mexico Beef Council and with fellow medical professionals, that we're really able to set that foundation, have those medical professionals recognize that we are a resource specifically in the beef protein arena, and have them utilize those resources that we have to share with, their patients and consumers.
Well, the thing that I saw with that university in the online realm is that most people saw right through it, and which is really good. But then, yeah, it added on to the mistrust of like, well, if this, suggestion is falsified, what about all these other suggestions? And in the social media realm, like being a young person, blessing, but mostly a curse. When I'm on there, I see a lot more people like advocating for the carnivore diet, which I think is really interesting. It's obviously a really extreme diet, that very extreme, because it's mostly just eating meat, eggs, sometimes cheese, and people are swearing by it. But I'm seeing a huge rise in that. Where do you think that like kind of came from, and why is it picking up so much traction?
It definitely comes from some influencers. I mean, there's a lot of people in the kind of social media space who are influencing that or recommending it. I do think kind of traditionally speaking, that people, when they first start on it, probably tend to maybe feel better if it's really true or just a placebo effect. I think again, it comes down to the sustainability of it. How likely are you able to only eat those items for the rest of your life? And what are going to be the long-term implications of that? So of course, we, want people to consume beef. We want people to consume beef as much as they would like to, recognizing that there's so many lean beef options for them. But I will always say that even though I am a dietitian who works for the New Mexico Beef Council and the Colorado Beef Council, I always wholeheartedly believe in making sure that we're consuming enough, of our fruits and our vegetables as well. And so I think, again, people tend to gravitate towards those diets or those eating patterns because they feel like it has to be hard for it to be worth it or for it to work. And I do think, in the beginning, it can be really exciting. You can have some great results. But I do think it comes down to the sustainability and the longevity of being able to follow that eating pattern for such a long time. I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago. There was a gentleman who was talking about being on the carnivore diet. He was really excited about it, but he said he was absolutely miserable. And so, you have to follow an eating pattern, and one that you're going to enjoy. I think that's maybe the other reason I got into dietetics, is because I just enjoy food so much. And I love also just the social aspect of it. I love being able to celebrate with my friends and my family. I love to be able to host people. And, so I think it's one of those, I really hate to see people who are on these diets or follow these eating patterns that take away that opportunity for them to enjoy those activities with their family, or enjoy some of the traditions that they would, regularly have around holidays. And so I do think, it's daunting for consumers, and it's sometimes daunting for medical professionals to try to siphon through all of that. But again, I'm just a huge advocate of making sure that we're looking at, the person as a whole, of not only what you eat, but again, exercise, sleep, how you manage your stress, environmental factors, as well, just access to food. That's another thing that, we really, in the space of nutrition and dietetics, is working on making sure that people have access to the food that they need and the food that they want. And so, it's just, there's just a lot of challenges, but a lot of them come down to being able to just bring credible information to medical professionals and to consumers, and essentially letting them make their own choice, but making sure that they understand that there's two sides to every story, but that, the research that we have in the beef industry is, evidence-based, based on sound science, and can be trusted as far as incorporating, beef into really a variety of healthy eating patterns.
I think when it comes to those like extreme diets, I think a huge part of people feeling better is the fact that they're no longer eating like potato chips and McDonald's fries, and like those things that are okay in moderation. But then if you're eating, it all comes down to moderation, like you've been saying. And I think that has a huge part of it, is that people are kind of cutting out some things that they probably aren't eating more than they should have. And that's, then they are credited to just eating that one thing with that diet. How do you think that we can compete with those Netflix documentaries? Because there's one that came out recently, that they had two like identical twins having two diets. One was vegan, one had meat involved in it, and the one that was vegan like lost more weight and was healthier and blah 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 blah. But then I believe later it came out that they actually weren't consuming the same amount of calories. But that's not the only Netflix documentary and other platform documentaries that skew things to make meat once again the bad guy. How do you think that we can compete with those types of things? Because that's something that's so relatively available.
That is so true. And it's so true. And it's just a huge challenge. I mean, in all the work that I do, and I think in all the work that everybody does, in the beef industry, is to dispel a lot of those myths and misperceptions. And again, just being able to offer that connection to agriculture. I mean, there is probably more interest now than ever and people wanting to know where their food comes from, but actually having an actual connection to agriculture is lower than ever. And so, when I went to school, I was at the University of Wyoming, a land grant university. Dietetics was in the College of Ag. So I was exposed to agriculture not only growing up, but then through college. I went to Utah State University, also a land grant university. And so I just had a deep connection to agriculture and the way that I was raised and the way that I was growing up in my schooling. And that is not the case. And so it's just different, right? Fewer and fewer people are involved in agriculture. So that makes it harder and harder to have people have that connection. But I think that that is one of the most valuable things is whatever way we can tell our story and really engage. I do think there's been a huge, kind of movement in people wanting to know their local producers. I know that certain state beef councils have been able to offer like a local beef directory for individuals to say, hey, I would like to maybe purchase beef directly from a producer who is in my area. So I do think that there's a lot more opportunity for people to want to get to know their producer. It's just, again, there's so few producers and so many people. And so how do you compete on that level as far as, with a Netflix? And that's a really good question. And I think we just continue to tell our story and fight the fight. And I always encourage my dietetic interns specifically to say, please go to the source. Please go to a producer. They're happy to tell you why they do things the way that they do things. Please don't just lean on a Netflix documentary, but it's so easy to sit on your couch, pull up Netflix and just watch that. And they can be incredibly convincing and they can be incredibly powerful. But recognizing too that there's probably a bias in the production of those as well. So
I think that we are getting a lot more ground because people do want to know where the food comes from, who was actually making it. People are kind of making their way through the weeds. And there's a lot more celebrities that are involved in agriculture and stuff like that. So it's really growing. And so I think that perhaps in the future we'll be able to have a platform to that level because so many people want it. And so I think whenever we have an opportunity to get like a Netflix level platform to produce more documentaries, I know that we do have some, but getting those documentaries to a more relatively available source where people like physically see it and aren't having to search it up on YouTube and stuff.
And I think also, I have seen just an influx in producers just being active on social media as well, and really telling consumers what they do on a daily basis and why they do it. And I think that's so incredibly powerful. Social media, like you said earlier, can be a blessing and a curse. I do think it allows, a wonderful opportunity to have reach and to be able to have some impact, but it also I also know it's an incredible amount of work. So I really, commend the producers who want to share their life and take that time. And I love, I'm sure that they get a lot of positive feedback and they probably get some incredibly negative feedback. So it's hard, I'm sure that it's a hard thing to be able to manage, but that's really, being able to kind of do some of those grassroots, level things I think are so very important. But I do commend a lot of the producers who are out there telling their story, sharing with, the public what they do and why they do it. And so I think, just hoping, however we can support them in doing that, as well.
I think that's definitely one of the best ways that we can get out there. That's something that I do, and it is it is a blessing and a curse. I had one video, and I don't really talk about it because in some aspect I'm embarrassed that I do it because everyone's like, oh my gosh, small town politics and this, that, and the next thing. So on some level, I was embarrassed to tell people that I actually did it, but it was something that I always wanted to do. But on Instagram, I had one video blow up with well over 1 million views, and it was nuts. And it was talking about how lab grown meat was now approved for sale in the United States, and the people that were mean were very, very mean and had some very all the 4-letter words, very unique insults I haven't heard before. So props to them with that. But the overwhelming majority of people in the comment section were very positive and wanted to support local ranchers and stuff. And they're like, I'm not eating that cancer meat is something that was repeated in there a lot. But the vast majority of people were positive. And when it comes to smaller videos, it's a lot more negative comments. But I think it's because that they want to say something mean. But I get more likes, which means that they liked it, right? Rather than negative comments. And so I think that people are interested in it, and it's just that fringe majority that are very mean. But it's definitely a mindset you have to get into to be able
And
to
it's also very, easy to sit behind a computer screen and be mean. And so I think that's one of the things too, is that, being able to get people out in front of producers to really hear the why is so incredibly powerful. But, the people who follow you and support you, I appreciate you doing that, because it is not for the faint at heart by any means. But there's always going to be naysayers, right? I mean, there's always going to be those that just, no matter what you say, no matter what research you show them, no matter what production practice you share with them, they just have made up their mind. But there are a lot of people in the movable middle, right? Where it's like, they're not quite sure. And we do have an opportunity then to be able to share with them the resource and the research, and the why behind it. And so I think, part of the challenge is that in the past, so many people were involved in agriculture. So many people knew exactly where their food came from. We've gotten away from that. But with that, we've gotten away from just kind of the heart and soul of agriculture, but then we've been inundated with, social media. And so it is, how do you decipher all of that? What is actually true? And so I really appreciate in the beef industry that they have seen the value of working with credentialed medical professionals, such as, registered dietitians, to be able to share, some of the research and some of the resources with fellow medical professionals, recognizing just the impact that physicians can have on their patients' lives. And so I really do appreciate that the beef industry has, recognized the importance of working with dietitians to share that nutrition story, and just how beef is just really one of the most naturally nourishing and sustaining foods available.
Yeah, we're at the point now that we have people who are unsure and unaware that we have to fight fire with fire, because we didn't think that we would have to fight for this type of stuff, and then all of a sudden we are. And the opposing side has been fighting for so long, they kind of had a leg up. And so I do appreciate how much people in the beef industry have been fighting, and that always has really been a grassroots organization. And I think going forward, we do need to utilize producers more, and if they want to share their story, give them platforms and opportunities to do so, whether it is with social media or talking to people, boots on the ground type of approach.
Yes.
All right, so that's about time. Is there anything else that you would like to add on before we wrap up?
I just thank you for the opportunity to be on the podcast. I love to be able to, speak to the Region 6 cattle women in Las Cruces in April. That was a wonderful opportunity just to engage with everybody. And I love to be able to share, with producers, just the work that I am doing and some of the information that I'm sharing, and appreciate this opportunity coming from that. So thank you for having me.
Of course. Thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, everyone, for watching or listening. We appreciate we appreciate all of our listeners, and make sure to watch out and tune in for our next episode. Thank you all so much.